hidden in the desert of Central Asia, is a country many people call the craziest dictatorship in the world. It's a land of gold statues, massive oil and gas reserves, and horrific human rights abuses. This is Turkmenistan, or as some call it, North Korea 2.0. The country is a black box. The internet here is some of the slowest and most restricted on Earth, while all independent media is banned and anyone who dares to speak out simply disappears. Almost nobody from the outside goes in and almost no information comes out. And the government would like to keep it that way. So it's the kind of place that doesn't take too kindly to foreign journalists posing as tourists to come in and make secret documentaries. And so that's exactly what we did. We got our hands on one of the rarest visas in the world and went inside a country ruled by propaganda and fear, where marble palaces stand beside miserable poverty. We talked to exiled journalists and rights groups to understand how this bizarre dictatorship survives today, and ask when, or indeed if, the country will ever open up. I'm Andrew for 2 and 20, and this is Turkmenistan, the secret kingdom. For years, Turkmenistan has been an enigma, almost like a parallel reality, sealed off from the outside world. And this is the first thing that you notice when you think about trying to go to Turkmenistan. It's just like really, really, really hard to get there. Only around 15,000 foreigners visit the country each year. Compare that to the roughly 300,000 foreigners who visited North Korea annually before the pandemic. You have to be on a guided tour to get in. So to get our tourist visa, we first had to talk to an agent over WhatsApp who helped us plan our itinerary, and then we had to wire nearly $1,000 each to an unknown bank account in Turkey, which pays in part for the guide and driver who will be with you for your entire time there. The country has no flight connections with any of its neighbors, so we had to first go to Kazakhstan, then fly to Uzbekistan, and then take an incredibly uncomfortable overnight train, and then a taxi, and then a bus, and then another bus, and then a third bus, and then a rather retro COVID test, before we finally crossed the border and had our passports stamped into Turkmenistan. And then after that, things start to get really, really weird. But okay, so that we can try to make sense of the just utter absurdity that you're about to witness, let's take a moment to learn about the country's history. So Turkmenistan became independent in 1991, but before that it had been part of the Soviet Union for more than 65 years. And it was immediately taken over by its former Soviet communist boss, who was a man called Saparmurat Niyazov. So Niyazov was, to put it lightly, a pretty strange guy. He had come to power in 1990, winning a punchy 98.3% of the vote in a race that had no other candidates. He built an intense cult of personality around himself, and he sealed off the country from the outside world in a policy that he called neutrality. He then, rather modestly, renamed himself to Turkmenbashi, which basically means father of the entire Turkmen nation. And even today, he's just everywhere. The first thing you see when crossing the border is a golden statue of him. But that's only just a taste of what's to come. And another thing about him, he wasn't a big fan of democracy, as our guide so chillly observed.
And 6 years later, after collapse of Soviet Union, he was then he was in power for 15 years.
Okay.
And he was elected president for life in early 2000s.
He died in 2006 and was succeeded by this guy, his vice president, Gurbanguly Berdukhamedov. And like his predecessor, he was also a pretty unusual character. Here he is, overseeing workouts, racing cars, and shooting rifles. And he even raps and DJs. And so like Turkmenbashi before him, he wanted everyone to think that he was a Democrat. So naturally, he was elected with a mere 89% of the vote in 2007, in a race in which all opposition parties were banned. He then squeezed through the 2012 election with 97% of the vote, and was re-elected again in 2017 with an even healthier 97.7%. But then Gurbanguly did something surprising. I don't know, maybe he got tired of winning or something. In 2020, he handed over the reins to his son, Sardar Berdukhamedov, who remains president to this day in a sort of power-sharing arrangement with his dad. Here he is, delivering a New Year's message on state TV. Wow. But the outright absurdity of this political system shouldn't distract us from the ugly truth. Turkmenistan today is one of the world's most repressive dictatorships. Civil society and independent media are completely banned. Access to outside information is strictly controlled. Ruslan Miatiev is an exiled Turkmen journalist who leads the independent media outlet Turkmen News.
The recent history has taught Turkmens to keep their mouths shut because of the repressions. It's a huge system. You don't know how big the security apparatus is in Turkmenistan. It's huge.
Those who dare to criticize the regime, even from abroad, can simply disappear. Some of them end up in places like Awadan Depir, a maximum security prison deep in the desert designed to house enemies of the state.
Police has agents everywhere. Every enterprise, at every organization, at every factory, everywhere they have their agents, stool pigeons, who would be telling them, okay, look, this guy, yesterday I spoke with him, he said something about that, something bad about the policies of our esteemed president.
If Turkmenistan's political system is controlled by one family, then its economy is controlled by one commodity, natural gas. And Turkmenistan has lots and lots and lots of it. It actually has the 4th largest natural gas reserves in the world, and the 2nd highest on a per capita basis, behind only Qatar. Natural gas and oil account for around 90% of the country's exports, and almost all of this goes to one market, China, which receives 90% of Turkmenistan's gas exports through a series of pipelines crossing Central Asia to Western China. So you'd probably think that people would be wealthy, right? Well, no. Instead, the country remains super isolated and undeveloped. According to government data, GDP per capita in Turkmenistan is around $10,000 per year, but the World Bank estimates it's actually more like $6,500, while people we spoke to on the ground in the country reported average annual salaries of only around $4,000 per year. That's kind of weird, right? Like, how could there be such a big difference? A big part of this is because of Turkmenistan's dual exchange rate system. The government insists that the currency, the manat, is worth 3.5 manat per dollar. But the actual value on the black market is more like 20 manat to the dollar. So naturally, our first stop when we arrived in the border town of Turkmenabad was to meet with these black market currency changes. Decades after the fall of the Soviet Union, Turkmenistan remains a poor, reclusive petro-dynasty situated slap bang in the middle of one of the world's most unstable regions. And that is why we just had to see it from the inside. After 6 hours on the desert roads, we arrived in Turkmenistan's capital, Ashgabat, where you realize immediately that you're getting a direct view into the mind of a very sane, pragmatic individual. So they call Ashgabat the White City, and as you look around here, as you can see, it's not really that hard to work out why. And pretty much every car on the road is white, because in 2015, the government decided to ban non-white cars from entering the city entirely. But that's just the tip of the iceberg. The almost religious cult of personality that built up around the first president is visible literally everywhere. Here is one of the many massive gold statues of him dotted around the city. And just next door is a monument of his book, the Ruhnama, an all-encompassing thesis on philosophy, politics, and the history and culture of the Turkmen people. The book was part of the core curriculum of all schools and universities, and for a period of time, months of the year were named after its chapters. Like the month of September was literally renamed to Ruhnama, for example.
Even drivers, when they wanted to get a license, they needed to pass exam.
But it wasn't just Turkmen drivers who needed to read the book. In 2005, they went so far as to put copies of the book on a rocket and blast it into outer space.
It's to open space for aliens to get acquainted.
We went on to the former president's mausoleum, where the great leader is buried. Inside the massive mosque next door, the book is even presented alongside the Quran, almost like the word of God, in what many Muslims consider to be a form of blasphemy. After hearing so much about the book, we decided we had to get a copy and read it ourselves. So we headed to the local bazaar. Вот, и у нас вот это на английском, да?
Да, английский.
Юрта перед Мадалан. Хорошо. Поэтому это цена была вот 250, да? Хорошо. Когда мы покупаем в чат. After some bargaining, we managed to pick up a copy of the book in English. And here it is, a fresh copy of the Renama we picked up in Ashgabat. Okay, let's take a quick look. Turkmenistan, my beloved motherland, my beloved homeland, you are always with me. In my thoughts, in my heart? Okay, look, I think that's enough Turkmen propaganda for one day. But it's not all just books and statues. He just made a bunch of bizarre and arbitrary policy decisions that just created misery for his own people. In 2006, for example, he ordered virtually all hospitals outside the capital closed and banned the import of medicines from Russia, leading to severe shortages of key drugs. Why, you ask? Well, he said they had enough hospitals in Ashgabat, so there was no need for any other hospitals anywhere else. Right. All of this at the same time, he stashed away some $2 billion of the country's money in an offshore bank account in Germany. This whole cult of personality and just the absurd waste of public money, it didn't stop with Turkmenbashi though. No. Instead, his successor, Gurbanguly Berdukhamedov, decided to double down and add his own. He drove a significant expansion of Ashgabat to fill it with his own weird passion projects. Honestly, one of the weirdest things you notice about Ashgabat is there's hardly anyone here. You walk around the street and it's pretty much completely empty. And okay, that might be in part because it's so insanely hot, but it's also because the city has been built as some kind of giant theme park for the all-powerful president without much or any thought at all to its actual residents. As we're driven around the new part of the city, we are taken to a string of empty monuments, many of them constructed to create new Guinness World Records. So first up, we rode on the world's largest indoor Ferris wheel, built by an Italian company in 2012. But despite costing $90 million, it hasn't exactly been a hit with the local people. Except for the girl at the gate, we are literally the only people there. We then visited a carpet museum, which proudly displays the world's single largest carpet, with the Guinness World Records certificates to prove it, and again, no one else there. We see a monument to commemorate another record, the world's largest single-line cycling parade. And we pass by the massive Olympic complex built for the 2017 Asian Indoor Games, which, at a cost of $5 billion, features a winter sports palace in a country where temperatures are regularly above 40 degrees Celsius, and a specially built monorail system in a city that doesn't even have a metro. One of Gurbanguly's other passions that you can see all over the city is horses. The government has a ministry for horses, and horse racing was one of the former president's favorite sports. We are even taken to a horse racing center as part of our tour. But you see, Gurbanguly hasn't always been quite as successful a jockey as the propaganda would have you believe. This footage was smuggled out of the country in 2013. The other jockeys carefully let the esteemed president win the race. But suddenly, everything goes wrong. The incident remains completely censored inside Turkmenistan today. And despite extensive research, I've never found out what happened to the horse. Driving on the city's empty streets between these huge, expensive monuments, you'd think you're in some kind of wealthy Gulf monarchy like Kuwait or Saudi Arabia. And to be fair, there is definitely wealth in Ashgabat. If you go to the major shopping malls, you see large high-end shops, fake Western brands, and even some real ones. It is clear that there is a comfortable middle class here that enjoys many of the same material luxuries that we have access to in the West, even if they can't eat KFC or use Instagram without a VPN. The government has spent literally billions on developing the capital, alongside its various vanity projects. But in the rest of the country, well, it's a bit of a different story.
Outside of Ashgabat, it's a failed state. At this very moment, in the city of Turkmenbashi, in the city of Balkanabad, in the city of Khazar, people don't have drinking water. And the government knows very well about these problems, yet they don't do it. They don't fix it. They don't build roads. They don't restore electricity, simply because they don't care.
Many of the country's roads are in total disrepair. Earlier this year, the government opened a new highway between the capital and the Uzbek border at a price tag of $2.4 billion. But that's only half the cost of the Ashgabat Olympic Village, which came 10 years earlier and now stands pretty much unused. As we traveled through the country on the way to the capital, we saw a largely poor agricultural society. with people working in the cotton fields in brutal heat. Cotton is the country's second product, after, of course, oil and gas. They exported more than $150 million of it in 2024, mostly to Turkey, where it is made into clothes and then re-exported to Western markets. But many of the people doing the picking face conditions described by rights organizations as forced labor or even slavery. According to Turkmen rights and cotton campaign groups, the government routinely forces government workers, such as teachers or nurses, to work in the cotton fields for no pay, threatening to fire them if they do not comply. Even children are forced to participate. Turkmenistan is just so closed off that it's hard to get a picture of what's actually happening on the ground. The government releases almost no data, and what it does release is, well, pretty hard to trust. But the metrics we can see tell a bleak story. Turkmenistan ranks alongside middle-income countries like Brazil, Peru, or Argentina on a pure GDP per capita basis. But a terrible public health system means that the average Turkmen dies 5 to 7 years younger than someone in a country of comparable wealth. In fact, Turkmenistan has the lowest life expectancy in Central Asia and is as much as 10 years behind its role models in Kuwait and Saudi. And the story is unfortunately the same with infant mortality. Despite its gas riches, Turkmenistan has by far the highest infant mortality rate in the region, with a level on par with Papua New Guinea. The next is the number of people in the country. It is widely suspected that the Turkmen government is lying about its own population. Official government data released after the 2022 census claims that the total population is more than 7 million. But government sources speaking to foreign media have said that the actual figure is as low as 4 million, and that the government is literally pulling the numbers out of thin air. So you're telling me that this guy is lying about a key government statistic, really? Okay, but what does this mean? It means that the government is trying to hide the fact that hundreds of thousands of its own citizens have fled abroad to escape poverty and repression at home. Galia Ibrahimova is a journalist and researcher on Central Asia for the Carnegie Endowment.
From the last year, they don't let some well-qualified person to leave the country. I think that also have this problem of working class who will work inside Turkmenistan if just to let the people left the country. I think that mostly people, they try to survive with this money transfer from their relatives who work abroad.
And so we wonder, if the gap between the capital and the provinces is so big, why doesn't everyone just move to the capital? Our guide has an answer.
Don't need permission.
Okay.
And usually people wait 5 years. Get permission.
So after a long day in the unbearable summer heat, we pick up some local vodka and head back to the hotel to chill out, passing by, of course, the government's Ministry of Horses on the way. But even here, there's just no escape from the weirdness. And we're greeted by a familiar face in the hotel's smoky snooker bar. Although he's no longer president, Gurbanguly Berdukhamedov's image is everywhere in the city. But now, it's the face of his son Serdar that takes pride of place. His portrait is just inescapable. It's everywhere from museums to shops to toll booths and even horse racing tracks. And so as we lay in the hotel room, watching the creepy propaganda music videos praising the city of Ashgabat, we couldn't help but wonder, who's really in charge? On our last day in Ashgabat, we got a new sense of just how arbitrary power in Turkmenistan can be. We approach yet another golden statue of Turkmenbashi, but this time it's a special one.
When it was located in the downtown, now it stands still, rotating and following the sun.
Oh wow. But the police have shown up and closed off the entire monument. We then try to visit another monument, this time to one of Turkmenistan's greatest poets. But again, lo and behold, it's the same wall of green-hatted policemen. And by the way, I don't have any pictures of them in this one because I tried to do it before and they kept telling me off for it, so I was trying to be secret and subtle and everything, so yeah, no pictures of the policemen. But it seems it's not just the itinerary of the government-approved tours that's changing. It appears that the balance of power between Serdar and his father Gurbanguly is shifting. In February this year, Serdar sacked a number of officials associated with his father's time in office, including 3 deputy prime ministers and, most interestingly, the Minister for National Security.
Demonstrating his loyalty to the old elite groups, little by little, he started to promote his own course.
The national security guy is the most interesting because, as head of the Turkmen KGB essentially, this guy is the head of the repressive infrastructure that keeps the president alive and in power.
Step by step, Serdar Berdukhamedov, he fired all the members from the old cabinet who was close to him and who controlled Serdar.
We also noticed some of these changes ourselves. Turkmenistan appears to be having some kind of small loosening for foreign visitors. We were able to walk around Ashgabat pretty freely and even had internet access in our hotel room. And recently, foreign journalists from a major Western media outlet were even allowed to visit the country. So, why would they do this? Well, one explanation is that this is part of a broader attempt to find new economic partners to reduce their dependence on selling gas to China. With 90% of their exports going to one buyer, the government realizes they need to diversify. And remember how we said that Turkmenistan has the world's 4th largest natural gas reserves, right? Well, it's big in reserves, but actually not that big in production. It's only 11th in production. And that's partly because there's not enough foreign investment and not enough pipeline infrastructure to get the gas out of the ground and sell it abroad. For years now, the Turkmen government has tried to push the construction of a new pipeline to take their gas across Afghanistan and Pakistan to new markets in India. But so far, it's not going well. Turkmenistan completed its own portion of the pipeline, but unsurprisingly, the Afghan section is moving pretty slowly. So Turkmenistan will likely remain dependent on Chinese demand for a long time to come. The other factor, it could just be generational change. Educated abroad in Russia and Switzerland and aged only 44, Serdar may have a more open and cosmopolitan outlook than his dad.
Everybody in the government knows that the system does not work. This is the system that Gurbanguly put in place. I think if he dies tomorrow, things would go easier in Turkmenistan, provided that Serdar maintains his seat.
Perhaps Serdar sees that it cannot go on like this. Perhaps Serdar is a different man to his father. So as we roll out of Ashgabat on the slow, crowded night train back to the border with Uzbekistan, I can't say I'm too optimistic about the prospects for real change in this strange, isolated country. Regimes like Turkmenistan, they function with a system of carrots for some and then sticks for the rest. Elites, so like ministers, army generals, and powerful businessmen, they're all kept on side by getting opportunities to profit from the corrupt status quo. The weird monuments, the pointless construction, the double exchange rate system, these are all huge money-making opportunities for the elites who control them. And so if Turkmenistan is to change, these elites will have to give up these privileges or have them taken from them. But the even bigger challenge is with the Turkmen people themselves. They aren't brainwashed. They know that they live in an absurd totalitarian regime.
People in Turkmenistan know exactly how people elsewhere live, you know. They block TikTok, they decrease the speed of internet, they block YouTube, all other social media, but yet Turkmens use them. They still use them. It's not effective to block internet anymore.
Turkmenistan's leaders know the risks from their own history. 35 years ago, the Soviet Union collapsed when Mikhail Gorbachev tried to ease the system of fear and repression that held the state together. People took their new freedom and demanded more. So Turkmenistan now faces a similar choice. They can keep the status quo and continue down the road to nowhere, or try to change the system and risk the whole house of cards coming crashing down in the process. As the political philosopher Alexis de Tocqueville observed, the most dangerous moment for a bad government is when it begins to reform. And this is the dictator's dilemma. Thank you for watching. Subscribe to 220 for more on economics, politics, and crazy dictators.